Hi, my name is Antoine. Welcome to my Dharma path. I'm going to read the last part of the second chapter of the Lotus Sutra, Expedient Means. Before I read, I'm going to give you some key terms. If you don't understand the full meaning of the term, just give it some time, and it takes time to resonate. Okay. Tathāgata, a title for the Buddha, meaning one who has thus come or thus gone, representing one who abides in ultimate truth. Śrāvaka, a disciple who attains liberation by hearing the teachings. Pratyekabuddha, one who awakens independently without a teacher, but does not teach others. Bodhisattva, a being who seeks enlightenment not just for themselves, but for all sentient beings. Samādhi, deep meditative absorption, a state of profound concentration and unity. Paramita, perfections or virtues cultivated on the path of Buddhahood. 10 suchnesses, the 10 aspects of reality: appearance, nature, entity, power, influence, internal cause, relation, latent effect, manifest effect, and consistency from beginning to end. Ekayāna, the one vehicle, the ultimate path that encompasses and transcends all others. In the sacred twilight of sound, we open the gate of boundless truth. The Tathāgata's voice flows like moonlight over water, illuminating the path beyond the 3 vehicles. Let us settle into silence, into Samādhi, where words become ways of wisdom and verses ripple through time as radiant mantras. Okay, I'm going to read now. I'm on page 33. I'm starting here. At that time, the world-honored one, wishing to state his meaning, once more spoke in verse form, saying, "There are monks and nuns who behave with overbearing arrogance, laymen full of self-esteem, laywomen who are lacking in faith. Among the 4 kinds of believers, the likes of these number 5,000. They fail to see their own errors, are heedless and remiss with regard to the precepts, cling to their shortcomings, unwilling to change. But these persons of small wisdom have already left. The chaff among this assembly has departed in the face of the Buddha's authority. These persons were a paltry merit and virtue, incapable of receiving this law. This assembly is now free of branches and leaves, made up only of those steadfast and truthful. Śrāvaka, listen carefully. For the law which the Buddhas have attained, through the power of countless expedient means, they preach for the benefit of living beings. The thoughts that are in the minds of living beings, the different types of paths they follow, their various desires and natures, the good and bad deeds they have done in previous existences, all these the Buddha takes cognizance of, and then he employs causes, similes, and parables, words that embody the power of expedient means, in order to gladden and please them all. Sometimes he preaches sutras, verses, stories of the previous lives of disciples, stories of the previous lives of the Buddha, of unheard of things. At other times he preaches regarding causes and conditions, uses similes, parables, passages of poetry, or discourses. For those of dull capacities who delight in a little law, who greedily cling to birth and death, who despite the innumerable Buddhas fail to practice the profound and wonderful way, but are perplexed and confused by a host of troubles. For these I preach nirvana. I devise these expedient means and so cause them to enter into the Buddha wisdom. Up to now I have never told you that you were certain to attain the Buddha way. The reason I have never preached in the manner was that the time to preach so had not yet come, but now is the very time when I must decisively preach the great vehicle I use these 9 devices, adapting them to living beings when I preach. My basic aim being to lead them into the great vehicle, and that is why I preach the sutra. There are sons of the Buddha whose minds are pure, who are gentle and of acute capacities, who under innumerable Buddhas have practiced the profound and wonderful law. Profound and wonderful way. For these sons of the Buddha, I preach the sutra of the great vehicle, and I predict that these persons in a future existence will attain the Buddha way, because deep in their minds they think of the Buddha and practice and uphold the pure precepts. They are assured they will attain Buddhahood. And hearing this, their whole bodies are filled with great joy. The Buddha knows their minds and their practices, and therefore preaches from the great vehicle. When the voice hearers and Bodhisattvas hear this law that I preach, as soon as they have heard one verse, they will all without doubt be certain of attaining Buddhahood. In the Buddha lands of the 10 directions, there is only the law of the one vehicle. There are not 2, there are not 3, except when the Buddha preaches so as an expedient means, merely employing provisional names and terms in order to conduct and guide living beings and preach to them the Buddha wisdom. The Buddhas appear in the world solely for this one reason, which is true. The other 2 are not the truth. Never do they use lesser vehicle to save living beings and ferry them across. The Buddha himself dwells in this great vehicle, and adorned with the power of meditation and wisdom that go with the law he has attained, he uses it to save living beings. He himself testifies to the unsurpassed way, the great vehicle, the law in which all things are equal. If I used a lesser vehicle to convert even one person, I would be guilty of stinginess and greed, but such a thing would be impossible. If a person will believe and take refuge in the Buddha, the thus come one will never deceive him, nor will he ever show greed or jealousy. For he has rooted out evil from among the phenomena. Therefore, throughout the 10 directions, the Buddha alone is without fear. I adorn my body with the special characteristics and shine my light upon the world. I am honored by numberless multitudes, and for them I preach the emblem of the reality of things. Śrāvaka, you should know that at the start I took a vow, hoping to make all persons equal to me, without any distinction between us. And what I long ago hoped for has now been fulfilled. I have converted all living beings and caused them all to enter the Buddha way. If, when I encounter living beings, I were in all cases to teach them the Buddha way, those without wisdom would become confused, and in their bewilderment would fail to accept my teachings. I know that such living beings have never in the past cultivated good roots, but have stubbornly clung to the 5 desires, and their folly and craving have given rise to affliction. The desires are the cause whereby they fall into the 3 evil paths, revolving will-like through the 6 realms of existence and undergoing every sort of suffering and pain. Having received a tiny form in the womb and existence, after existence they constantly grow to maturity, persons of meager virtue and small merit. They are troubled and beset by manifold sufferings. They stray into the dense forest of mistaken views, debating as to what exists and what does not, and in the end cling to such views, embracing all 62 of them. There's a footnote, 62 possible views that arise from the 2 vehicles, that there is existence and that there is no existence. The term is often used to refer to all the non-Buddhist views that were current in Shakyamuni's time. Go back to the reading. They are profoundly committed to false and empty doctrines, holding firmly to them, unable to set them aside, arrogant and puffed up with self-importance, fawning and devious, insincere in mind. For 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000 kalpas, they will not hear the Buddha's name, nor will they hear the correct law. Such people are difficult to save. For these reasons, Śrāvaka, I have for their sake established expedient means, preaching the way that ends all suffering, and showing them nirvana. But although I preach nirvana, this is not a true extinction. All phenomena from the very first have of themselves constantly borne the marks of tranquil extinction. Once the sons of the Buddha have carried out this path, then in a future existence they will be able to become Buddhas. I have employed the power of expedient means to unfold and demonstrate this doctrine of three vehicles, but the world-honored ones, every one of them, all preach the single vehicle way. Now before this great assembly I must clear away all doubts and perplexities. There is no discrepancy in the words of the Buddhas. There is only one vehicle, not two. For numberless kalpas in the past, countless Buddhas who have now entered extinction, 100,000, 10,000, million types in numbers, and incapable of calculation. Kalpa. We have to understand what a kalpa is. What is a kalpa?
A kalpa is a really long period of time in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, often considered to be an eon. It's used to measure the lifespan of the universe, encompassing cycles of creation and destruction. The exact length varies, but it's generally thought to be billions of years. Fascinating concept, huh?
We just talked about a kalpa. Remember that living in Buddhist cosmology, each individual living being is going from lifetime to lifetime. So they're passing away and being reborn. Such world-honored ones, using different types of causes, similes, and parables, the power of countless expedient means, have expounded the characteristics of teachings. These world-honored ones have all preached the doctrine of the single vehicle, converting countless living beings and causing them to enter the Buddha way. And these great sage lords, knowing what is desired deep in the minds of the heavenly and human beings and the other living beings throughout all the worlds, have employed still other expedient means to help illuminate the highest truth. If there are living beings who have encountered these past Buddhas, and if they have listened to their law, presented alms, or kept the precepts, shown forbearance, been assiduous, practiced meditation and wisdom, and so forth, cultivating various kinds of merit and virtue, then persons such as these all have attained the Buddha way. After the Buddhas have passed into extinction, if persons are of good and gentle mind, then living beings such as these have all attained the Buddha way. After the Buddhas have passed into extinction, if persons make offerings to the relics, raising 10,000 or 1,000,000 kinds of towers, using gold, silver, and crystal, seashell and agate, carnelian, lapis lazuli, pearls, to purify and adorn themselves. In this way, erecting towers, or if they raise up stone mortuary temples, or those of sandalwood, or aloes, or vina, or other kinds of timber, or of brick, tile, clay, or earth. In the midst of the broad fields they pile up earth to make a mortuary temple for the Buddhas. Or even if little boys at play should collect sand to make a Buddha tower, then persons such as these have all attained the Buddha way. You're talking about crystals down here, carnelian, pearls, lapis, and the references to trees, sandalwood, other kinds of plants, aloes, those might be incense. If there are persons who, for the sake of the Buddha, fashion and set up images, carving them with many distinguishing characteristics, then all have attained the Buddha way. Or if they make things out of 7 kinds of gems, of copper, red or white copper, pewter, lead, tin, iron, wood, or clay, or use cloth soaked in lacquer or resin to adorn and fashion Buddha images, then persons such as these have all attained the Buddha way. If they employ pigments of paint Buddha images, endowing them with characteristics of hundredfold merit, if they make themselves or have others make them, then all have attained the Buddha way. Even if little boys in play should use a piece of glass or wood or a brush or perhaps a fingernail to draw an image of the Buddha, such persons as these, bit by bit, will pile up merit and will become fully endowed with a mind of great compassion. They all have attained the Buddha way. Merely by converting the Bodhisattvas, they bring salvation and release to numberless multitudes. And if persons in the presence of such memorial towers, such jeweled images and painted images, should with reverent minds make offerings of flowers, incense, banners, or canopies, or if they should employ persons to make music, striking drums or blowing horns or conch shells, playing pipes, flutes, zithers, harps, balloon guitars, cymbals, and gongs, and if these many kinds of wonderful notes are intended wholly as an offering, or if one with a joyful mind sings a song in praise of the Buddha's virtue, even if it is just one small note, then all who does these things have attained the Buddha way. If someone with a confused and distracted mind should take even one flower and offer it to a painted image, in time he would come to see countless Buddhas. Or if a person should bow or perform obeisance, or should merely press his palms together, or even should raise a single hand or give no more than a slight nod of the head, and if this were done in offering to an image, then in time he will come to see countless Buddhas. And if he himself attains the unsurpassed way and spreads salvation abroad to countless multitudes, he will enter the nirvana of no remainder, as a fire dies out when the firewood is exhausted. If persons with confused and distracted minds should enter a memorial tower and once exclaim, "Hail to the Buddha," then all have attained the Buddha way. If from past Buddhas, when they were in the world or after their extinction, there should be those who heard this law, then all have attained the Buddha way, the world-honored ones of the future, whose numbers will be incalculable. These thus come ones will also employ expedient means to preach the law, and all these thus come ones through countless expedient means will save and bring release to living beings, so that they enter the Buddha's wisdom, which is free of outflows. Okay, so you're talking about incense, gongs, bells, instruments that go onto an altar, an image of the Buddha. It's not, you're not talking about worship. By putting the image up and making an offering to it, that the Buddha will come, or a Buddha or Buddhas will come, or it's believed that they will come, because you've made that cause to invite their presence. When they achieve enlightenment, they go somewhere. They don't disappear. They're not on the earth. They still exist. If there are those who hear the law, then not a one will fail to attain the Buddhahood. The original vow of the Buddhas was the Buddha way, which they themselves practice, should be shared universally among living beings, so that they too may attain the same way. The Buddhas of future ages, although they preach hundreds, thousands, millions, a countless number of doctrines, in truth do so for the sake of the single vehicle. The Buddhas, most honored of two-legged beings, know that phenomena have no constantly fixed nature, that the seeds of Buddhahood sprout through causation, and for this reason they preach the single vehicle. But that these phenomena are part of an abiding law, that the characteristics of the world are constantly abiding, this they have come to know in the place of practice, and as leaders and teachers they preach expedient means. The presently existing Buddhas of the 10 directions, whom heavenly and human beings make offerings to, who in number are like Ganges sands. They have appeared in the world in order to bring peace and comfort to living beings, and they too preach the law in this way. They understand the foremost truth of tranquil extinction, and therefore employ the power of expedient means. And though they point out various different paths, in truth they do so for the sake of the Buddha vehicle. They understand the actions of living beings, the thoughts that lie deep in their minds, the deeds they have carried out in the past, their desires, their natures, the power of their exertions, and whether their capacities are acute or dull. We're saying they can actually see into your minds here. And so they employ various causes and conditions, similes, parables, and other words and phrases, adapting with expedient means are suitable to their preaching. Now I am like this. In order to bring peace and comfort to living beings, I employ various different doctrines. To disseminate the Buddha way, through the power of my wisdom, I know the nature and desires of living beings, and through expedient means I preach these doctrines, causing all living beings to attain joy and gladness. Śrāvaka, you should understand that I view things through the Buddha eye. I see the living beings in the 6 paths. Go in and look up what a Buddha eye is and find out more. Also 6 paths when you have time. How poor and distressed they are, without merit or wisdom. How they enter the perilous road of birth and death, their sufferings counting with never a break. How deeply they are attached to the 5 desires, like a yak enamored of its tail, blinding themselves with greed and infatuation. Their vision so impaired they can see nothing. Remember, you're not actually talking about a yak. This is like a parable or a simile. They do not seek the Buddha with this great might or the law that can end their sufferings, but enter deeply into erroneous views, hoping to shed suffering through greater suffering. For the sake of these living beings, I summon up a mind of great compassion. When I first sat in the place of practice and gazed at the tree and walked around it for the space of 3 times 7 days, I pondered the matter in this way. The wisdom I have attained, I thought, is subtle, wonderful, the foremost, but living beings, dull in capacity, are addicted to pleasure and blinded by stupidity. With persons such as this, what can I say? How can I save them? At that time, the Brahmin kings, along with the heavenly king Śrāvaka, the 4 heavenly kings who guard the world, and the heavenly great freedom in company with other heavenly beings and their hundreds and thousands and 10,000s of followers, reverently pressed their palms together and bowed, begging me to turn the wheel of the law. Immediately I thought to myself that if I merely praise the Buddha vehicle, then the living beings sunk in their suffering
Welcome back. Suffering can be
would be incapable of believing this law. Could you explain the wheel-turning kings and turning the wheel of the Dharma?
Sure thing, Antoine. In Buddhism, a wheel-turning king, or Chakravartin, is a ruler who upholds moral and spiritual principles, bringing peace and prosperity. Turning the wheel of the Dharma refers to the Buddha's teaching of the path to enlightenment, symbolizing the spread of his teachings. It represents the transformative power of wisdom and compassion. What draws you to these concepts?
And where are the wheel-turning kings?
The wheel-turning kings. In Buddhist tradition, they're considered ideal rulers who govern with righteousness and uphold Dharma, or cosmic law and order. This concept symbolizes the ideal of enlightened leadership, aiming to create harmony and prosperity. It's a metaphorical rather than a literal title, so you find them more in the realm of ideals and values. Intrigued by the concept?
And because they rejected the law and failed to believe it, they would fall into the three evil paths. It would be better if I did not preach the law but quickly entered into nirvana. Then my thoughts turned to the Buddhas of the past and the power of expedient means they had employed. And I thought that the way I had now attained should likewise be preached as three vehicles. When I thought in this manner, the Buddhas of the 10 directions all appeared, and with Brahma sounds comforted and instructed me. Well done, Shakyamuni, they said. Foremost leader and teacher, you have attained the unsurpassed law. But following the example of all other Buddhas, you will employ the power of expedient means. We too have all attained the most wonderful, the foremost law, but for the sake of living beings, we make distinctions and preach the three vehicles. People of small wisdom delight in a small law, unable to believe that they themselves could become Buddhas. Therefore, we employ expedient means, making distinctions and preaching various goals. But though we preach the three vehicles, we do it merely in order to teach the Bodhisattvas. Sariputta, you should understand this. When I heard the saintly lions and their deep, pure, subtle, wonderful sounds, I rejoiced, crying, "Hail to the Buddhas!" Then I thought to myself, I have come into this impure and evil world, and as these Buddhas have preached, I too must follow that example in my actions. After I had thought of the matter in this way, I set out once for Varanasi. The marks of tranquil extinction borne by all phenomena cannot be explained in words, and therefore I use the power of expedient means to preach the 5 ascetics. This I termed turning the wheel of the law, and also with regard to the sound of nirvana and arhat, dharma and smanga. I use these terms to indicate distinctions. From infinite kalpas in the past, I have extolled and taught the law of nirvana, ending the long sufferings of birth and death. This is how I customarily preached. Śrāvaka, you should know this. When I looked at the Buddha's sons, I saw incalculable thousands, 10,000s, millions who had determined to seek the way of the Buddha. Everyone with a respectful and reverent mind, all coming to the place of the Buddha, persons who in the past had listened to other Buddhas and heard the law preached through expedient means. Immediately the thought came to me that the reason the thus come one has appeared is so he may preach the Buddha wisdom. Now is precisely the time to do so. Sariputta, you should understand that persons of dull capacity and small wisdom who are attached to appearances, proud and overbearing, are incapable of believing in this law. Now I joyfully and fearlessly in the midst of the Bodhisattvas, honestly discarding expedient means, will preach only the unsurpassed way. When the Bodhisattvas hear this law, they will be released from entanglements of doubt. The 12,000 arhats, they too will all attain Buddhahood, following the same fashion that the Buddhas of the 3 existences employ in preaching the law. I now will do likewise, preaching a law that is without distinctions. The time when the Buddhas appear in the world are far apart and difficult to encounter, and even when they appear in the world, it is difficult for them to preach this law. Throughout incalculable, innumerable kalpas, it is rare that one may hear this sutra. Such a person is likewise rare. It is like the Umbadara flower, which all the world loves and delights in. The Umbadara flower only blooms once every 3,000 years, which appears only once in many, many ages. If a person hears this law, delights and praises it, even if he utters just one word, then he has made offerings to all the Buddhas of the 3 existences. But a person like this is very rarely found. rarer than the Udambara flower. You should have no doubts. I, being king of the doctrines, make this announcement to the entire great assembly. I employ only the single vehicle way to teach and convert the Bodhisattvas. I have no voice-hearer disciples. You, Śrāvaka, and the voice-hearers and Bodhisattvas, you should understand that this wonderful law is the secret crux of the Buddhas. Before I finish reading, a voice-hearer is someone who is clairaudient. Clairaudience. In this evil world are the five impurities. Those who merely delight in and are attached to desires, living beings such as this in the end, will never seek the Buddha way. Even when evil persons in ages to come hear the Buddha preach the single vehicle, they will be confused, will not believe or accept it, will reject the law and fall into the evil paths. But when there are those with a sense of shame, persons of purity who have determined to seek the Buddha way, then for the sake of such as these, one should widely praise the way of the single vehicle. Sariputra, you should understand this. The law of the Buddha is like this, employing 10,000 a million expedient means. They accord with what is appropriate in preaching the law. Those who are not versed in this matter cannot fully comprehend this, but you and others already know how the Buddhas, the teachers of the world, accord with what is appropriate in employing expedient means. You will have no more doubts or perplexities, but your minds, filled with great joy, will know that you yourselves will attain Buddhahood. That's the end of the second chapter of the Lotus Sutra, Expedient Means. This ends the luminous echo of the Buddha's vow, a resonance beyond sutras, beyond stars, and the stillness that follows. May our hearts carry the pulse of the Ekayāna, the one vehicle of compassionate awakening. With each breath, we remember suchness is not distance, it is the breath itself. My name is Antoine. Welcome to my Dharma path. Thank you for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave some comments.